Welcome to the T2 Hubcast with me, Spencer Locker.
And me, Tracy Roberts.
Good morning, Tracy.
Good morning.
What's on your mind?
What is on my mind is making sure that I and all of us are really prepared for a big event that we're going to help facilitate and host next week.
Is this the one in Cave Castle?
This is the one at Cave Castle. So we're really fortunate to be able to go there as a venue. We're going to hold a senior leadership event for KCOM and we're very excited.
Yeah.
So local partners, which we love to work with. So yeah, I guess that is majorly what's on my mind right now.
Excellent.
Great question.
And I suppose this is the reason why we're asking these great questions, or we're trying to, because today's Hubcast is very much focused on the T2 coaching clinic, which isn't really sort of taking people through the whole gamut of coaching, but just sort of trying to address some of the rumours, speculation, some of the reasons why people don't like coaching or don't like to be seen as coaching or don't like to ask for coaching. There's loads of different things, and we just want to pick one or two, maybe three or more.
Main points, yeah.
Main points that hopefully might sort of address any questions that you might ask, you might have, dear listener. On the subject of coaching. So
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and for me, from a kick-off, I think we've got to understand why, but we've got to understand about... So many people don't like coaching because they're not qualified coaches. Well, why should I? I can't coach. I haven't been on a course. I haven't done this, I haven't done that. And it can really sort of... Some people don't care, but some people can get stressed out about it.
Yeah.
You know what? The times when a qualified coach is absolutely fine.
Yes.
But I think people need to, if people are a developed leader and a competent leader, then they should be able to practice what I would call coaching skills.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily being a qualified coach, but as a leader, I think you're regularly going to come across team members. You're going to come across stakeholders. You're going to come across other leaders and peers who might not be in the best situation. They might be struggling to find answers. They might be it might be personal or professional.
Yeah,
there's lots of different things here. You can lean into that with coaching skills.
Oh yeah,
you don't have to be a coach.
No, it's about being coach-like.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
And I would argue that also at work, you're absolutely right. Like with experience and leadership, etc., it sort of should really become part of a natural process that you can hone and you can use when required. I would argue that just as a human, just generally in life, you can become coach-like in a lot more situations. So think about, here's a hot topic right now for you and I, teenagers.
Hey. Yeah.
I know it sounds awful because we're parents, and of course the parent status has to stay, but there are times that you know that if you give advice or you're quite directive with a teenager, they're going to want to ignore everything you said, and actually sometimes it just incites a load of problems. So quite often taking a more coach-like approach, even just in the way you land something or the question you ask, can almost diffuse a situation or give you a better answer. And I'm not saying that works for all teenagers, by the way, but I'm just using it as a way of, even when you're with your partner, sometimes they might want to, offload to you. It happens a lot. And your first thing to do is to go in, and I think they covered this in one of the last podcasts, which is your advice monster. You want to lean in and go, well, this is what I do in X, Y, Z. And actually at that point, sort of turn it into the coach-like approach is sometimes the best option. Sometimes it's maybe to help them understand by asking a few more questions. And although you're not saying I'm coaching my partner, you sort of are helping them help themselves in a way. So I'd argue that if you get good at this, it's useful in any situation, right?
For me, it's relationship management, whether it's personal or professional.
Yeah.
And because of that, I would suggest, and people might argue or people might disagree, but I would suggest that there will be people in your life that you will coach. Mm-hmm. There will be people in your life that you will be coached by, and there will be people in your life that you neither want to be coached by or want to coach.
Yeah.
When we talk about relationships, we had a situation not that long ago, really, where we're working with an organisation, and they were really proactive and they really wanted to sort of put coaching in place with their people, but they allocated coaches randomly. and people were not comfortable with that. So I would suggest that people need to have some say in who they are coaching or who they are coached by, because there's a relationship there.
I think if you are trying to get a long-term relationship that's successful and you've got aims and objectives that you try to land on, I totally agree. I mean, we've only got to look at the way we do things here. When we get coaching as part of any of our partnership programs, or even just people that come through for exec coaching, we don't just allocate randomly. We sit and we look at the information we've got on that individual and think, actually, who would be best suited to that person? And now and again, not very often, now and again, things don't click and we maybe change to a different coach. That's the right thing to do. So I think for 99% of cases, if you've got that choice, you're absolutely right, because it's relationships. But I'm going to put a challenge back here. Some people don't like to be given feedback or advice, which sometimes is delivered in the form of coaching by anyone that they don't, I don't know, maybe see as a subject matter expert or have an already grown respect for, etc. I would argue that in some cases, sometimes they offer a perspective that you've not considered.
Certainly.
Or even if you don't agree with what they said, you can make sense, something in that conversation is like a little glimmer that you can cling to and go, okay, so maybe we disagree on that approach. But what I've learned from that is the way I communicated myself in that situation wasn't clear. So I totally agree. I think you should 100% try and put people together that are going to, work together in the right way. But I also think coaching opportunities come up and you don't have that choice sometimes, in which case by, I guess, me being growth mindset orientated and thinking, what can I learn from this situation rather than the subject, sometimes helps. But I can think of those people over the years that have tried to give me advice, and in my brain, my unconscious motivators, my gremlins, all those things are saying, yeah, but you don't know, or you've not done this job, or you're 10 years younger than me, or you've not done my job for the last 15 years, so what do you know? And that can be difficult to, get yourself out of that pattern, can't it?
And I think if people have listened to James and Benice's podcast about listening, I think that helps, because, as you said, with the advice monster, somebody's coming in and giving you advice. Yes. If they haven't established rapport with you, if you establish rapport, if you listen from a coaching perspective, from a person who is demonstrating coaching skills, you've got to listen to what people are saying, and that is going to help you establish rapport.
Yes,
because then you can check, you understand, you can clarify and confirm. So what I'm hearing is this: is that right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, straight away, before you even start thinking about either doing the 7 questions, which I'm sure we're going to talk about at some stage. But before we go there, actually, you're establishing rapport. And people might sort of be sat there thinking, you know what, I don't particularly like you, but you get me?
Yeah.
You understand me? It's that...
It feels like you're in it together, I guess, is what we're saying. Collaborative exploration of a subject, or even when people are delivering feedback on an observation, and they're kind of trying to do it in the form of coaching, I think if the rapport's there, it's easier, but sometimes it's just in the delivery style, isn't it? It's thinking about, like you say, certain words we would or wouldn't use that might, make that message land slightly differently, as an example, or rather than jumping in and, forcing an opinion on someone, thinking about a different way of how to land that. So, do you know what? I think we've got a hard question to consider, but I think it's important that we sit and think about that, and land in the statement in a room that kind of, okay, so now we have to sit down and have a conversation. But essentially what we're saying is we're trying to get people to understand that today, you don't have to go on a £7,000 coaching course to qualify yourself to be able to use some of these skills. And it's worthwhile mentioning as well that this, again, translates across. Let's talk about an organisation. Peer-to-peer coaching is a really important way to do things. We know that in some of the organisations we work with, we've encouraged this. We've said pair people together and think about the dynamic of that team and how that's going to work. That could be another subject that we just need to cover in a second, actually. But for other people, it is more around, okay, you've maybe got more of a mentor in the organisation who's sort of a lot of the time is giving you support in terms of your development. But, you know, from time to time, we kind of go across that mentoring coaching continuum, don't we?
And I think that's a really good point that I think we do need to clarify, because when we start thinking about what we're trying to achieve, what is the purpose of this coaching relationship? And that sort of brings up the question, what's coaching? What is a coach? Because I believe, and you may very well disagree, but I believe that there's a number of different types of coaching. So there's the standard coaching that we see in sports, which is coaching new skills. Yeah. So it could be in a sports or performance, whatever. You're coaching in new skills. So this is I suppose this is on that borderline between coaching and mentoring.
Of course, yeah.
But then you've also got coaching, which is facilitating solutions. So this is helping and supporting people to come up with their own solutions. Don't get me wrong, it's not just a case of sit back, get the cabana out and listen to somebody struggle.
Yes, it's a bit like guidance.
Guiding it and facilitating it, but not actually turning around saying,
this is what you need
to do this and you need to do that. Again, Bernice and James talked about the advice monsters in their various guises. But yeah, so what is it that we're trying to achieve? Don't get me wrong. It might be that we've got one specific aim that we're trying to elicit from this particular person or this situation, or it might be establishing a coaching relationship over a period of time, which can support. It can raise confidence in people. So we've got to understand what that aim is.
What does it look like? Is it long, short term? Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I guess that it goes, just going quickly back to that subject there about pairing people up. So when you're going to work with a coach, you know, for me personally, over the years when I've had coaches, you're absolutely right. The rapport factor has been really important. But the rapport factor doesn't necessarily mean that they're like you. It actually means that you kind of enjoy the conversation, their approach suits you. It might be that actually you want someone with a slightly different way of seeing things to you because you want a little bit more challenge. It might be that you're quite an expressive person and the person that you're working with is a little bit more thoughtful and curious and more questions, and almost slows you down a little bit, because sometimes you need that. Sometimes you want to go to someone who's exactly like you because you want them to feel your energy and feed off you and you feed off them. And I guess when it comes to us thinking about who we pair with, we mainly go on the information we've got available. So for us, we're quite fortunate. We have usually psychometrics from someone, so we understand their drivers, their motivators, the communication style. We understand all of ours at T2, so we go, oh, actually, yeah. But the other thing is experience. Sometimes it's type of sector you've worked in, because you can talk the same language. That can be a good thing. That can be a bad thing, because sometimes you're only still focusing on that stuff that you know from that sector. So sometimes it is good to go completely left field and go, actually, I want to go outside my circle a little bit more. And sometimes even, you know, that saying, we're the perfect pair on paper. I think it might have come off something like Love Island. On paper, that person's perfect for me.
That's why I haven't heard it before.
Well, I don't know either, but that's why I'm saying I think it was from Love Island. That's a great example of, where you on paper, this person's built this way, that person's built that way, the communication style's this and theirs is that, that's going to work. You get together and the connection just isn't there. So I think that even if you make that decision in an organisation to pair people, and it's not quite working, I'm not saying you give up after the first session, but if you notice a pattern that doesn't feel as comfortable and the conversation isn't as flowing and we aren't naturally kind of, I guess, more relaxed and coach-like while we're together, then perhaps it isn't the right setup. And I think for a lot of people, they struggle with that because they're maybe looking only for coaching at the person above them whose job they would like in the future, or someone similar at that level where they're aspiring to be. They're not necessarily looking along the line at the fact that it doesn't matter if someone's on the same level as you, they can still offer some really great insight. And actually, you maybe feel more comfortable with them sometimes. But equally, we always talk about different types of coaching. Even coaches have coaches, so you got to think about, where does a coach get their coach? They go through the same process, don't they? So, so I think it's important to mention that similarities can be good, but differences actually can be even better sometimes, because a critical friend sometimes is kind of what you need, isn't it? And that's what that coach can essentially become.
Sure. Absolutely. And when we consider the coaching is on that sort of coaching mentoring continuum, coaching is closer to counselling.
Yes, it is.
And when we start talking about counsellors have counsellors.
Well, they need they take too much on themselves to be able to process half the stuff that they take on.
So and again, we've got different coaches have coaches, but people have different coaches for different things. So like when you start looking at some of the most successful teams, sports teams in particular, you've got defensive coaches, offensive coaches, goalkeeping coaches. We've got you've got nutritional coaches, you've got recovery coach, you've got coaches with all these different
very
specialities.
Specialist.
So when we talk to somebody about who's in your board of directors, you've got all these different characters in your life. Providing different services, I suppose. Then at least one of those is going to be coach-like. Got to be. Yeah,
you'd like to think actually if you've got the right relationship, that's actually a good point. If you have the right people in that circle, that personal board of directors, I would argue that most of those people are coached like a lot of the time. There's maybe one or two in there that if you were really questioning their approach are more towards the directive advice monster end, and you maybe lean into that a bit too much sometimes. I've definitely worked with coaching clients in the last couple of years that, when I ask them to name that board of directors so that I can understand their support mechanisms and stuff, will name people that were their boss or are their boss right now, or someone who's, really high up in another industry that they really aspire to be. And when I ask them about, what the value they get from that, a lot of the answers I get back or, that they kind of respond is that they'll give them the answers to things sometimes, or they'll tell them what to do. And I have to challenge that sometimes and say, right, so I appreciate that you really respect that person and what they bring to your circle. And of course they add value. But how are you going to figure things out for yourself if, 2 or 3 of those people in your top 5 board of directors are people who are directive and they don't ask you questions? And I think quite often then we unpeel that a little bit and realise that those people have been trying to turn into those people and not thinking for themselves. Yeah. So I always challenge people to say, you might have people, and by the way, there is totally a place for advice. Yeah. 100%. But when you deliver it, you've got to deliver it slightly differently. That's the way I see it. But yeah, I think that's maybe a good question for people to ask themselves. If you think you've got people around you that you feel are coach-like, are they coach-like? Or are they more towards that end of I go to them when I need to know what to do next? Because that is different, isn't it?
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, you need that sometimes. Sometimes you need to go here. But here's the thing, sometimes people it's just the way they question it back. They might say something like, my best guess would be, or when I was in your shoes previously, here's what I did. You're not then giving that person, that is what you need to do. You're saying, you might stop and say, what are your options? And straight away, instead of going to that advice monster place or that directive, this is what I did in the past, you're getting them instantly to go back into their own mind's eye and go, actually, I haven't really paused to think about that because I was expecting you to give me the answer for that. And even just that pause sometimes from people is enough for them to go, oh, actually, I probably do have 2 or 3 options, but I was going to this one and I knew you'd probably agree with that. So that's why I came to you. Because we've got to remember, advice is only as good as the person, receiving it sometimes. It's like, is that the right thing to do for me? And for me is a good thing to remember, isn't it?
Yes. And I think that is a key thing in all learning and development.
Yes.
In the sense that we get given a lot of generic information on training days and experiences, a lot of that generic information, and if you take it at face value and try and apply it and it doesn't work, you lose it. You've got to take that generic information and put it into your own context. So what does that look like in my world? What does that look like to me? And there's more chance of it working.
Yeah, definitely.
If it's ever so slightly morphed. And again, when we start talking about coaching, we start talking about listening. Then before there's any advice given, or if there's any information given, or if you're eliciting any opinions or anything like that, if you've listened accurately, then the chances are it's going to be closer to your context than it is generic.
100%. And taking that time to listen more, and I guess program your own brain to shut that advice monster up and go, okay, what next? I always think, what question can you jump back with straight away? If you can program your brain to ask a question and another question, then that's allowing you that space to process the listening and then think about obviously what the response could be.
Okay. So you brought it up, questions.
Questions.
So now we're talking about questions. I know we're both big fans of Michael Bungay Stanier.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Some of my favourite books in the last few years.
Habit,
yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. And I got a great deal from that book. And I still go back to it quite frequently.
Same, yeah.
However, one of the big things that I got from that book was the 7 coaching questions.
Yeah, I think it kind of, when you speak to people about formulation of questions, I think people tend to panic a little and go quite wordy, or they think they overthink what they should say and what they shouldn't say. And of course, it's important to think there are certain things that might not give you the right answers to things like open and closed questions. And I've got some things I can share with you after we've looked at the 7. But for me, it's more around those 7 questions are kind of like, give us a bit of a format, if you like, for if we were to pick 1 or 2 of those out with a specific person and get into the habit of using them, then actually there's almost like an offshoot that comes out of that, and it becomes kind of organic, doesn't it?
This is my crib sheet. So This is what I put together. It's got all 7 questions on it. I always take, when I'm going into a coaching session, I will always take one of these with me, and I've also got a big bunch of these in my pack up, so that when I'm out with clients, if the subject of coaching comes up and I think it's appropriate, I'll dish these out.
And I think that the reason that we kind of like this is at T2, obviously, we like simplification.
Oh, yeah.
But, we like to use credible sources, obviously. And we think that the work that he's done is equivalent in our eyes to what Professor Steve Peters did with the chimp paradox. It's making quite a dense subject, really simplifying it.
Accessible.
Yeah, for people to think, I can be coach-like. I don't have to be a coach all the time, but I can be more coach-like. It takes a few of those sort of panicky moments out of what do I say next? Because again, what tends to happen is the advice monster comes back, or we dip straight back into mentoring or showing people, or even worse, we take the work back and do it ourselves. And I think if you're going to be focusing on growth in an organisation and you really care about your people, and which I'm sure all the lovely listeners do, then essentially we want to help them help themselves. And that's what coaching is. It's not about, process too much. It's more around the time that you can spend with people, formulating a little bit of a rapport, getting an understanding, and actually guiding them in the right direction. Like you say, sometimes it means that we have to slip out of sitting back and guiding and going slightly more into that put the arm around approach, but it doesn't mean that we have to go all the way back to directive. Because 9 times out of 10, that's not, there's a time and a place for that, but it's not in those learning moments. And when it comes to delivering stuff in terms of questions, I think people do overthink it a little bit too much. But there are some certain things like, one of my recommendations would be not to start a question with why. That sometimes is something that can feel like a bit of a personal attack on people. Like, why did you do it that way? Yeah. There's other ways that you could word it. Walk me through your process to help me understand how you landed on that particular scenario. If I say, why did you do that? What do you think?
It's a bit accusatory, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of put me on the spot.
Exactly. So and I know this sounds really stupid, but it's just the basics of, and then for you is another thing that I like. And we'll probably talk about this when we go through these 7 questions. What does that mean to you, for you? How are you going to take this information? And if you add that little you bit on there, it makes people take ownership a little bit more.
Empowering, isn't it? Yeah. And it also, again, when we start thinking about what has prompted or what can prompt some of these unofficial coaching moments. I'm sure we have all been in situations to a greater or lesser degree where we've been in company of friends or colleagues where they've basically verbally vomited on us. Where you and I
definitely have.
Or they've walked in and they've just gone, and they've thrown it all out there, and we haven't said anything, but they've gone, oh, that's what I was looking for. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And walk away because they've got it all out of here and put it all out there, and because they've done that,
Yeah.
It's easier for them to identify what the solution is or what they need to see or whatever. So when we start talking about you, it's very much focused on what I can control, what you can control, what is in your sphere of control, rather than focusing on how many times have we heard people actually moaning about, well, they do this and they do that, and it's them over there, and it's you can't control them.
No. So what did he call that in the book? Coaching the ghost.
Yes.
Because you can't.
No,
you can only coach the person in front of you.
Yeah, and and this is the thing.
And I love that because it does actually, if you think about the visualization of that, is like when you get someone into a coaching session and you're trying to, or even just having a one-to-one, it becomes a coaching session and it's all about this situation. We've got to find a way to funnel that conversation.
Yeah.
And we'll explain the questions in a minute, but within the questions, there's a way to funnel to the three different elements that you might want to focus on individually, because otherwise we get a moment where people are just popcorning everywhere.
Yeah.
If you can visualize that, that's just a whole lot of stuff going off that you're not quite sure what kernel to grab. Okay, so shall we go through the 7 questions?
I'll give you the question.
Yeah.
And then you give us a little bit of an explanation. I know we're not going to spend too much time on this because I know James and Bernice talked a bit about these questions.
Yes.
But it's always good to sort of revisit these and get
100%.
it. So question 1, our kickstart question.
Yeah.
What is on your mind?
Yeah, I think, for most people, you can, it's even a question when someone hasn't approached you, directly. You can lean in once you pick up on a change in, I don't know, their behavior or just their demeanor on the day. It allows that open situation for that person to recognize that you really want to know what's at the top of their mind. There's kind of a few variations on there, isn't there? You could say, what's keeping you up at night? What's the one thing troubling you right now? Yeah. But basically it's helping you to let them know you're opening the door because you want to help understand where they're coming from right now, what's going on for them. And then you can as they start to speak, think about how you can funnel the conversation. Because for some people, and I should imagine what some people are thinking when you say that is, I've got a couple of people who are quite expressive that I work with, and as soon as I ask them what's on their mind, I literally know everything that's going on in every country of the world. And I want answers to all my questions right now. And of course that's when we do start to get, and if you want to read the book, you'll read about popcorning and all those things. It's really funny because for me, I connect with all of it. You've got to be able to then funnel it and say, okay, and what else, which is the next one.
Yeah, no,
so what's that known as?
All question.
Yeah, so and what else?
And what else? So this is basically one of the things you said about question 1 was what's on the top of your mind.
Yes.
So just because that's the first thing they can think of, it doesn't necessarily mean that is going to be the big thing, the big thing, or the basis of anything. So the or question, I love that. AWE, or and what else?
Yeah. And the interesting thing about the or question is you can ask that several times, okay? Because this question is to encourage them to share more, dig deeper, and then try to actually get to the issue at hand. Because like you say, quite often there's this thing at the top, and then when we start digging, we realise that actually we haven't had a complete understanding in that first sentence. We now know that actually A is now F.
Yeah.
And actually, the more that we ask and what else, initially for some people it's like, oh, another one 6 or 7 times. Sometimes people you could ask them that question and you'll filter it all the way down. Then you can go back to the filter, which is what should we concentrate on first? Projects, people, or patterns. You'll find that most of those things fall into those 3 categories, and that allows you the space to concentrate on one thing at one time, rather than trying to deal with coaching the ghost or all those situations that are going on. And
I think that with the and what the or question as well, I think that not only does it help you understand as a coach, but the subject understands.
Yes.
Because they can be overwhelmed potentially by all these different things that's going on and being pulled from pillar to post. But actually going through that and what else exercise can help them understand. Because again, it's not a race. It's not the first thing that they've got to chuck out. Sometimes they will take that pause.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's, I hadn't thought of it that way. I haven't seen it out.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is actually a big thing, and this is where it leads to it. So you're actually going down this path that helps them understand it as much as you as the coach.
Yeah, it takes you in the right room is the way I would explain it. And you can keep doing that. And when you say, and what else? And they say, no, nothing else, that's it. Then take that as a sign of success, because you've actually taken them, as you said, right down to the right room. You as a coach is applying your conscious listening. So when they're talking, you're trying to kind of make sense of some of the patterns, people, projects that are going on there. Is it one thing and you want to kind of pick a few things off, or is it a multitude of things you need to focus on one thing? But it allows you the space to then say the next question, which is
for the focus question 3.
Yeah.
So what is the real challenge for you? So now we've actually got them to share with you, and we've got in a relationship, we've got a basic understanding. Now we're giving them the opportunity to prioritize.
Yeah.
To actually sort of go, right, okay, I feel this is the real challenge for me at the moment.
Yeah, and this question generally helps us, as I say, taking them along the corridor into the right door, identify the actual challenges they're facing, and I again, in their mind, bringing the stuff that's the most important to the front. And this is going beyond symptoms or surface level issues, because sometimes, as we know, think of it when we're having a chimpy day and we come in and we see this one thing that tips us over the edge, but actually that's not the problem at all. It's this back here that happened 3 days ago. By doing this and I guess slowing down that call to action on our advice monster as well, and the and what else and the conscious listening, we're allowing ourselves place to think of maybe more specific questions to this individual. But we're also, the big thing there is as well is for you. So we're putting it back on them. They're not generalizers. If you think about an organizational problem, the world is terrible and the processes need to change. But what you're trying to focus on at that moment is them and their reactions and their needs and requirements. So then, there's a, the main, what's the real challenge here for you? But you might turn into something like, if anything were possible right now, what would you focus on? Similar sort of question, but you're getting them to, now you've funneled it to be more specific about what they need.
Yeah.
And then we get a bit lazy, right?
Well, sort of. So now he's still focused on you. So question 4 is the foundation question, I think.
Yeah.
Because now we've got, when we start talking about the foundation, for me, my sort of interpretation of that is hitting rock bottom. So we've dug all the way down. So the question 4 is, what do you want?
Yeah.
So now we're right at the bottom, and now we're pushing back up. So where are we going with this? What do you want ideally?
What's the outcome you want?
Yeah.
So this question helps them clarify the goals, is what we're saying, isn't it? So their objectives, which is essential for creating a clear plan of action. We've got to be careful with this one, though. What do you want? Sounds different to what do you want? What would you like to achieve? Yeah. What are the objectives that you would, what would be a win for you?
Yeah.
If you knew you couldn't fail, what would you try based on what you know? If all the current obstacles were removed, what would you want the end goal to be? So you could change that question very, very slightly, but essentially what you're saying is, what do you want to happen? What would good look like for you at the end, right?
Yeah. What's progress? What is an outcome? What is, because not everybody wants the same thing.
No, and we can make assumptions. So going back to, if we're hearing what we're hearing and we're making assumptions based on, without asking the and what else, and we're basing it on the blah, 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 blah bit here, and we haven't actually slowed it down to funnel it, and then we just apply advice at this point, we've not achieved our goals, and they're not going through, like you say, that process of coaching themselves by walking themselves through that situation. So this helps us really think about, what difference will it make if we know what good looks like at the end?
Question 5, the lazy question.
Yeah.
How can I help you? So I know he calls it the lazy question, but I think it's really poignant because now we've identified where the client, the subject, has identified what they want.
Yeah.
Now you're allowing them to identify what part in this your achievement of this am I going to play?
What have you come to me for?
Yeah.
Essentially, in a polite way, isn't it? Yeah. This is to show your willingness to support and assist the individual in achieving their goals. But the key word there is support and assist. You're not there to plug a hole. And one of the things that was shared in a podcast that I listened to around this was, at that point when you say, how can I help you? Or what do you need from me? Or, what would you like my team to do? Or something similar to that. Most of the time people are stopped in their tracks. There's a big pause, because what they expected was on all those questions before, you were going to answer all those questions right now. You were going to give them what to do next. So they wouldn't have to think about that. They would actually just go, oh, hang on, we're 4 questions down and you've not given me an answer yet. And actually, I can see when that happens sometimes. And again, it's not me being disrespectful to anyone I work with, but people do. They come to me a lot and ask me, and I get to that question and they haven't got the answer for how I can help, because they expected me to help before. As in, I was going to jump in with a solution. So this allows them to slow down and pinpoint exactly what would help them. So rather than, I want you to solve all of my problems, what you were saying there is, I can help and assist, but you're going to have to tell me what exactly I can do in this moment. And right at this moment, you're going to realize that I can't solve all those problems, and you're going to have to start investing in yourself. So right at that moment, that's you saying, I will offer help, but you need to help yourself. That's the way I see it.
Absolutely.
So I really like that question.
Yes, I like it as well. Question 6. Next one, the strategic question. And I think this is one of my favourites, I've got to say. If you are saying yes to this, what are you saying no to?
And I think everybody needs to ask themselves that question several times a day, in my opinion. That's my biggest problem. I never do it. This question helps people recognise the trade-offs. So they're going to need to, to sort of put in place to make sure they can achieve these goals and priorities in the right way. Because for most people that say yes to a lot of things, they don't consider the offshot of what that might mean. And also the other thing is, it's about making them realise that there's not, you don't have an unlimited amount of time. And some things are quite time specific and time stamped, and you need to move them forward quickly. And it's almost like a reshuffle of your priorities, isn't it? So if this thing is keeping you awake at night right now, but you're putting it off because there's all these other things going on over here. But the coach's job there is to almost stipulate, if this is the thing that's keeping you awake at night, but you're telling me that all these other things here are stopping you from fixing this thing, then you need to go back around your priorities. So I think it's really, really important that we actually do that. And I would recommend, if there's any question that any of you could write down to ask yourself several times a day, particularly if you're working with diverse stakeholders and, busy diaries, back-to-back team calls, etc., ask yourself that question.
And finally, question 7 of the 7 questions, the learning question. What was most useful for you? Now, I do this on a daily basis. I've got to be honest with you. I reflect on over the day, and I've always got I've got an answer for that. I've always got an answer for what is the most useful. What have I got out of today? What do I know now that I didn't know before? What can I do now? What? So it's a reflective question. It's for 2 reasons. If you put it in place as coaching, it's to allow that individual there to reflect on what they've learned or gained from the time with you. So if you've offered, I don't know, some specific thought-provoking conversation or a new subject that they've not considered, or maybe even just the fact that by asking the strategic question, you've actually put it back in their ballpark, that the reason they're actually getting the coaching in the first place is because they're not doing that. Whatever it is, that how you've added value, it helps you. So it's quite a selfish question, because as a coach you go, did I hit the mark or not? And then the other thing is that as that reflective piece of going back over that conversation for the individual and going, actually, the pivotal point for me was this, or the key things that I can go work on now is this. So in either direction, it's still a really, really good question to help the future as well, because if something's landed in a certain way in that coaching conversation, then it went really well, then you're going to apply that again. If something didn't quite land or your questions didn't quite hit the mark, then of course you can take that and think, okay, what can I change next time? So for me, it is a bit of a lazy thing for us. But in the long term, it's definitely one of those situations where we can both gain from asking ourselves that question. And the good thing about all these questions is they don't have to be asked in that order. There are certain questions that you might just pick 1 or 2 of them out and ask them in specific occasions. There might be more emphasis on, I don't know, for the all question when someone feels overwhelmed and they're, everything's coming out, if that makes sense. The lazy question might get asked more than you'd like. How can I help? Because the reality is that some people will just come in and snowball everything and land it at your desk. And actually at that point, you've got to
to put a couple of things in place. But generally, I mean, there are 7 questions. If you can just remember those, they're quite simple. But try and think of your questions in types is what I would say. You know, we have a whole heap of things that we use here at T2 for our tools. We've got coaching cards, collaboration cards, cultivation cards, and curiosity cards. And we use them with our clients. But think about the different types of questions that you could, you know, I guess, formulate yourself in your own environment. Evergreen questions. So these are general questions that you can ask multiple times with lots of different stakeholders.
Yeah.
Solution-focused questions that might be more focused on how you deliver a desired outcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Problem-focused questions. They can be really useful for removing obstacles. And then I put occasional use questions on my list here because there may be unusual questions that might lose power if they're asked many times.
Yeah.
So one of the ones that I heard within my sporting background was, if your health could speak, what do you think it would say to you? And I thought, oh,
if your health could speak,
what would it say to you right now? And I thought, actually, that's quite a cut-in question for someone who's come in asking for support around their health and fitness. But what it does force them to do is think, wow, I've got to try and put that in my own words now, you know, and that's quite a big question, that.
Yeah.
But if I kept asking that all the time, it'd have limited impact on people. But when it comes to things like evergreen questions, what do you value? What's next? What are we learning this week? Solution focused. What would you prefer? When you've dealt with something similar successfully, what happened? Problem focused. What are you afraid of? That's a good one.
Yeah.
What's standing in your way? So they're just very simple things, but obviously we're used to coaching, so we can craft our questions a lot more more focused, specific on situations.
Yeah.
One that I like is, take one of those assumptions and imagine the opposite were true. What would you do differently? Just to get someone to stop in the moment and reframe their advice monster, their gremlin, whatever's going on in there. I think that stuff like that makes them think differently about the situation they're in. And then another one that I like to ask as well is, you know, when someone is giving you a reason why they might not be taking action on something. So we're going down these questions here. Think about one of those biggest risks that you've just outlined. How could you minimize it? So we're not trying to jump in and give a solution. We're accepting the fact there is a risk there, but we're also putting back on the table, there's probably a way to mitigate it a little bit. That could be a good one. And here's a good one. If you took a helicopter view of your situation from the outside, what do you see? So this is like, elevate yourself out, look in, and see a bigger view. Because when you're coming in to be coached, quite often everything's drowning out the sense.
This is the thing, is when if you're in shadow, to use print vernacular, or if your chimp is out, then you're going to lose your peripheral vision and you're focusing on the threat.
You are 100%.
So if you're focused on the threat, you can't see that big picture. All you are focused on is that threat.
100%.
So when we start looking at, if you force somebody to actually take that objective, elevated position and then reassess, then maybe.
Yeah.
It just helps them.
100%. And what we're trying to, I guess, land on in this particular podcast is a continuous culture of communication. So on other podcasts, we've dug into things like radical candor, you know, because feedback and coaching can be very closely linked. Let's not forget that. And actually, if radical candor is alive in our organisation and we're used to soliciting and giving feedback with kindness and fairness, then ultimately the coaching side flows naturally. That's the way I see it, because we're starting with care personally, challenge directly all the time. We're soliciting feedback. We're giving specific, sincere praise and also kind, clear criticism. But then we're also checking back in how that lands with people. So going back to the last question that we've got on our list there, that what was the most useful for you to a degree, but also how was the tone, how did that land, and how can we make this better in the long term? I think if you can link the two things, the more coach-like approach to things, approaching every conversation a little bit like that, and then thinking about how that then allows you to safely flow into performance management and, tough coaching conversations and feedback conversations, everything's intertwined, so if we can approach all these things with curiosity, even a performance management review, let's be honest, we sometimes have to slip into coaching in those, because we want to get them to see, you know, so how do you feel you've done on this project? What's your thoughts? You know, and quite often we have to guide and you know, but if we have that safe space where we're always honest and we're approaching things, you know, in a clear way, then the reality is the questions are just questions, and actually we all feel like we've got something to offer the conversation, and it just feels like a natural process. So if you can get used to helping people out by either giving them the kind, clear criticism or the sincere praise, that, you know, the specifics about what you see, and equally you enter every conversation with, you know, whether it's these 7 questions or variations of that 7 questions, think about how different that would affect you if people weren't either just listening with the intent to respond, or listening and offering their own advice. What decisions could you have made that might have been different, you know, if people had given you that space? One that I used last week with a client that was really, really interesting was, now that we've got to the bottom of this situation, how committed are you to changing the situation on a scale of 1 to 10? And the room went quiet for quite a while.
Right.
And the reason it went quiet is because, and I'm going to use an expression I've used a few times this week, people want change, but they don't also want to change.
Yeah.
So that made us have a very different conversation, because at that moment it was a 5, because there were so many other things going on. And I said, well, if you're going to give that situation a 5, but it's keeping you awake at night, then you're going to be in a similar situation, you know, in the future. So in that moment, if we then recognize it's a 10, but we haven't given it the space, then that's a different conversation, isn't it? And then also it's around decision making as well. Someone comes to you to help them make a decision. You've got to say to them, well, what resources or information do you need to help you make that decision? And what have you got and what don't you have? Because sometimes we haven't thought about the thing that's missing. So just by asking that question, they go have a conversation with someone in another department, and it helps that. It might be another 5-minute job to go and have that conversation, but then we've engaged all stakeholders and thought of all possibilities. The last thing I wanted to land on was, I've been working with a lot of people that are kind of working as sort of coaches stroke consultants, a bit like us. Yeah. And the conversation we often have when we're kind of working in that kind of collaborative environment is, it goes back to like how we get this right. We often are seen as experts in our field. So for those of you listening, a lot of you are very, experts in your specific area. People look up to you, and when there's a situation, you are the expert that swoops in, sorts everything out, and then vanishes. Okay, and in some situations, that's what's needed. That's troubleshooting. But in the long term, we want to head more towards this like epic collaborator kind of type role. Quite often it evolves into safe pair of hands. Okay, so this is where someone will follow the requirements of what's in front of them, and maybe not even actually ask too much questions about what makes sense, and be more curious. So they'll deliver it. They'll deliver the outcome, if you like. But to get this right, especially from a coaching perspective, or to think about how coaching and obviously consulting and collaborating works, you've got to work with someone to define the problems and co-create and implement the solution. And I think if you can think about how you can move from expert right up to collaborator, then the reality is that this becomes a kind of normal process. It is like constant stakeholder management to a degree. It's thinking, actually, how can I open this up a little bit more for it to feel like we're both in this together? And we're open to coaching on a daily basis. It can be on-the-spot coaching. It can be in a one-to-one. It can be, coaching based on feedback. So here's my observation. This is what I saw, and this is the strategy I think we could try next. What's your thoughts on that? And it could just be ad hoc, coffee break. I want to have a little rant. I'm going to popcorn everywhere, and your job is to funnel. So I think that kind of like gives us a bit of insight into how to be more coach-like. We are obviously doing a lot of work with clients on this at the minute. So if anyone's interested in coming up with a workshop that can help you think about how this all links with, the communications sort of circle at work, feedback, all those great things. It all linked to psychological safety, by the way, which is one of our biggest topics. I'm going to leave you all with a question. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. If you knew you couldn't fail, what would you try this week? I'll let you answer that.
Flying.
Seriously though, think about it. If you were to go back through your list of jobs, list of things that are keeping you awake at night, and you knew you couldn't fail. Pick one thing.
Yeah,
What would you try?
Well, it's the question that means most to me than the answer. I mean, firstly, I do find that sometimes managers and leaders who are employing coaching skills seem to want to find a resolution as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And that resolution might get stuff done now, but won't necessarily get stuff done in the future. The secret's in the coaching relationship and 100%. The coaching process.
Yeah.
So when we start talking about if I knew I couldn't fail, actually I find a lot of learning in failure. I find my best learning has been through failure. But again, that's me.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really, really good question, a really valid question, because every single person who's heard that question now will have a different answer.
Exactly.
And I think that's the value of asking the right questions and being curious.
Yeah.
And practicing listening skills.
Absolutely. And one thing that could help us as coaches, as a final question, before you're going to go and have that conversation with someone, here's something that I like to do. How would you sum up your problem or your issue in one word? Okay. So it kind of funnels you into this emotional state, if you like, and you can get granular in terms of how you feel. And if you can communicate that in one word and then go out from that, it will help you understand your reactions as well. So it might be overwhelmed, or it might be fear, it might be embarrassment, it might, all those things is just one word. And if you were to start the conversation with, I am feeling this way, or my problem is this, then, it makes it a lot easier for you to go forward from that, rather than actually having to reverse engineer and get granular. Yeah. So, that's another conversation completely. But if you can do that, then it will really help you connect with your reactions and responses, and hopefully then help these questions flow much easier. Okay. And the final question. Are you going to come up with a question now? No, I'm not. No, I'm just chucking it back at you. So if you knew you couldn't fail, because you asked me that, and everybody else, to ask you that, if you knew you couldn't fail, what would you do? This week. I knew I couldn't fail. Do you know what I would do? I would say no to at least 2 things on my to-do list. Oh, that's really good, actually, yeah. So it links it back to that question, because I know that there are probably 2 or 3 too many things in my diary that I'm uncomfortable with right now, because I'm someone who likes to do it all at a really high standard. Right. As soon as that starts to fail, I then, even with it, by the way, nobody else would know they're not at my 100%, but I know. And then I start to get into a position where internally I'm overwhelmed and I don't feel like I'm turning out my best work. Yeah. So I need to take my own advice and think, if I couldn't fail and I could make a change this week, I would delay those things by another week or put another timestamp on them, and I would say no to them. You know what? Actually, that puts that question into a different perspective for me, because failure there would be frustration. Yes, 100%. And potentially anger. So actually, I get it. I do. Good question. Tracy Roberts, as always, a pleasure. Always. So that's wrapped up for the this episode of the T2 Hubcast. Please make sure that you subscribe if you can. And we'll see you again at a later date. Take care. Tracy. Bye-bye now.